The most expensive mistake Elena Voss ever made cost her exactly nothing to perform. By the time she refused to shake Marcus Hale's hand, she had already set 2.4 billion in motion. She just didn't know it yet. The conference room on the 42nd floor of Voss Tower was all glass and morning light. Floor-to-ceiling panels, the Manhattan skyline arranged behind them like a backdrop somebody had paid for. 312 investors were watching from terminals in London, Singapore, Zurich, and hotel rooms in cities that had nothing to do with what was about to happen here. The livestream ticker read, Voss-Hale Merger, Live Q3 Summit. The camera in the upper corner of the room blinked its steady red light. The obsidian table ran the length of the room, and the 12 board members seated along it wore the arranged casualness of people who had memorized every unspoken rule of a space like this. Elena stood at the head of the table. 32 years old, cream blazer, hair smooth, posture carrying the ease of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged somewhere. She had been raised inside rooms like this one. She breathed in them the way other people breathed outside. Jordan Reyes sat near the center, tablet angled in front of him, reading glasses halfway down his nose. Elena's CFO. He had access to everything, which also meant he knew things that weren't on the agenda. He was looking at something on his screen that no one else in the room was looking at yet. The door opened at 8:49. Marcus Hale walked in. 34 years old, 6 feet even. Dark charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. Not casual, but precise. He carried a thin leather portfolio and moved with the measured ease of a man who had been in enough rooms like this to know exactly what they were built for, and exactly what they thought of him. He crossed to Elena and extended his right hand. Clean, direct. The standard opening gesture of a business introduction. The same motion performed 1,000 times a day in rooms exactly like this one. Elena looked at it. 1 beat. 2. Then she pulled her hand back. Not tucked away, not crossed over her chest, an inch or two back. Clean and deliberate, the way you decline something that doesn't appeal to you. The room caught it. The silence that followed had weight. The kind that forms around something everyone has seen, and no one is yet willing to name. Marcus did not move. His hand stayed extended for one precise second, then he lowered it. Nothing on his face shifted, no flinch, no flicker. Elena reached into her blazer pocket and removed a small square of silk, ivory, expensive. She unfolded it with 2 fingers, pressed it once against her palm, turned it over, pressed again. Then she let it go. The silk landed directly in front of Marcus's shoes. "If you're going to be in this room," she said, voice pleasant, almost conversational, "at least clean up after yourself." Someone near the far end of the table made a sound that was working hard not to be a laugh. A security guard materialized at Marcus's left shoulder, smoothly, with the practiced unobtrusiveness of someone trained to appear without being summoned. He dropped his voice to the register of authority dressed as courtesy. "Sir, we need to verify your access. Please remove your coat." A voice from somewhere along the table. "Is he part of the service staff?" It wasn't loud. The room was quiet enough that it didn't need to be. Small laughter moved through the space, compressed, half-swallowed, the sound of people giving permission to something they weren't willing to fully endorse out loud. The silk square lay on the floor between them. Marcus did not look down at it. He looked at Elena. Not with anger. His expression hadn't changed. He looked at her the way you look at a data point you are filing away. Directly, without opinion, with complete attention. Then he looked around the room. Slowly. Not a sweep, not a performance. A man taking inventory of a space and every person in it. Jordan Reyes had stopped scrolling. He was looking at Marcus. Then he looked back at his screen and both hands went still on the edge of the table. Then his voice cut through the quiet, and it was not casual at all. Short interest just jumped. A pause. $600 million. The number landed in the room and sat there. Elena's expression held, but something behind it recalibrated. A system running a check and not yet knowing what to do with the result. Marcus let his eyes settle on the camera in the upper corner of the room. Its red light blinked on, steady and indifferent, recording everything. Then, almost imperceptibly, the left corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. He had been waiting for a morning like this one for considerably longer than anyone in this room understood. 12 hours earlier. The city looked different at 9 in the evening. Not worse, just more honest. The softened light blurred the edges of things, and Manhattan stopped performing for a few hours and just existed. Traffic moved at its actual pace. The towers held their lights like lanterns, indifferent and massive, and entirely unimpressed by the lives moving in and out of them. Marcus Hale stood at the window of his office on the 31st floor of a building on Park Avenue that was not the most impressive building on the block. That was how he preferred it. The office was clean and deliberately spare. No trophies, no framed covers, no gallery wall of handshakes with important people. A desk, a whiteboard covered in acquisition logic in blue and black marker, a bookshelf with nothing decorative on it, and a single photograph on the corner of the desk, turned slightly inward so it faced the chair more than the room. He was holding a watch. Not the kind people wore in his world, not brushed titanium, not a Swiss movement, not a brand that announced itself in the first 3 seconds of a conversation. A Seiko, automatic, at least 30 years old, scratched crystal, leather band replaced twice. The case was worn on one edge from years of being set down on the same surface at the same angle. On the back, in small stamped letters that had softened with time, "Keep going. We made it this far." His father had bought it the year the family moved to Queens. His father, who had worked nights in the maintenance division of the building that would eventually become Voss Tower. Who had taken the crosstown bus in the dark, both ways. Who pressed Marcus's school shirts every morning on a board set up between the kitchen and the living room because there was no other room. Marcus set the watch on the windowsill facing him. Lila Thompson knocked twice and came in. She was 28 years old, efficient in the way that serious people are efficient. Not hurried, but purposeful. Every movement aimed at something. She would be running her own operation within 5 years, and probably knew it. She carried a tablet in her left hand and set a single printed page on the edge of his desk. "Final board list for tomorrow." She didn't sit. "Elena confirmed the full board is present, plus 3 of the institutional investors you've been tracking." "Radmore Capital?" "Center table, second seat on the right." He nodded. "There's something else." She paused. The pause she used when she was about to say something she knew he already understood, but needed said aloud anyway. "Elena's board has a pattern. 5 of the 7 members who voted on major external deals in the past 4 years voted to exclude proposals from firms that weren't already in their social network. 3 of those firms were led by—" "I know, Viola. They've been told you're coming tomorrow. The security protocol is stricter than normal. 3 additional guards on the conference floor." Another pause. "Elena requested it, specifically." He turned back to the window. There were things you learned in this industry about the texture of hostility that existed in rooms with marble floors and $14,000 conference tables. It was never declared. Nobody used the word, not openly, not anymore. It was architectural, procedural. It lived in the way invitations got lost between the correct email address and the correct inbox, the way your access credentials somehow failed to update before an important event, the way you were asked to confirm your credentials 3 separate times in one afternoon while the man beside you, with fewer credentials, was never asked once. The silk handkerchief moments, in different forms, accumulating across a decade into a single, unmistakable message. This space was not built for you, and we intend to keep reminding you. Marcus had never once responded to that message directly. Not because it didn't cost him. It did. He just wasn't going to spend his energy on the argument. He was going to spend it on the position. He opened his laptop and pulled up a dashboard on a network connected to nothing public. Dense. Columns of financial data, entity structures, cash flow mapping. Tracking, in more detail than any public filing contained, the liquidity infrastructure of Voss Enterprises across the preceding 24 months. The data told a story. Not a flattering one. Voss had expanded aggressively over 3 years. Commercial real estate acquisitions, a fintech subsidiary, a stake in a mid-tier logistics chain. Each expansion funded through institutional debt and what the filings described, in the opaque language of sophisticated finance, as strategic liquidity guarantees from a third-party entity. The third-party entity was anonymous. It had been anonymous for 6 months. Structurally, a shell, 4 layers deep, registered in 2 separate jurisdictions, with an operating history stretching back no further than 18 months. Marcus had known the identity of that entity for a long time. Lila was reading over his shoulder. "If you activate this," she said, "there's no going back." Marcus was quiet for a few seconds. He reached out and touched the edge of the watch on the windowsill. "They've been playing a long game," he said. A pause. "So have I." Lila looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the screen, at the dense grid of financial architecture and 12-digit numbers moving through invisible channels between addresses with no names attached to them. Then she said, "Okay." She picked up the printed page and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her. Marcus sat down. He opened the merger contract, 340 pages, flagged in 18 places, and started reading from the beginning. He already knew every word of it. He read it again anyway. The gala had started at 7. It was held in the atrium of Voss Tower's lower floors, the part of the building designed to look older and more permanent than it was. High ceilings with exposed steel beams dressed in warm lighting, white-clothed tables arranged in careful asymmetry. A string quartet near the south wall playing something contemporary, scored to sound like it wasn't. The invitation said business casual. Everyone in the room was wearing at least $4,000. Marcus arrived at 7:18. He was not on the VIP display list. This happened at the entrance, in the form of a young woman behind a tablet who scrolled through the verified guest column 3 times, with her eyes narrowing slightly each pass, then looked up at Marcus with the professional blankness of someone very good at communicating bad news without technically saying anything. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not finding your name on the primary access tier." "Marcus Hale, Hale Investments. I should be under the merger-affiliated partners list." She scrolled again. "I see a Hale Investments registration, but it's flagged for secondary verification. Could you wait just a moment?" He waited 4 minutes. Other guests arrived, were greeted, waved through without a second glance. A man in a cashmere blazer walked straight past the desk, laughing at something on his phone, and nobody said a word to him. The coordinator returned with a second tablet and the mildly apologetic expression. "We've got you here now. I'm so sorry for the delay." He was in. Technically. The room was loud the way expensive rooms get loud. Not chaotic, but dense. 100 parallel negotiations wrapped in the social language of cocktail hour. Marcus moved through it with the self-containment he always brought to these events. He didn't need to work the room. He was already working. He found the cluster of board members near the East Bar at 7:41. He joined the edge of the conversation. Commercial real estate forecasts, a subject he knew better than anyone in the group. He offered 2 observations that were, objectively, the most precise things said in that exchange. Both were received with a polite nod and absorbed into the current of talk without acknowledgement of their source. He was standing with a glass of water when one of the board members, older, silver-haired, a Voss Enterprises cufflink at his wrist, turned toward the passing server, realized the server had moved on, and extended his empty cocktail glass sideways into Marcus's general space. "Can you take this?" He wasn't looking at Marcus when he said it. He was already turning back. Marcus looked at the glass, then at the back of the man's head. "There's a server at the bar on your left," he said, voice entirely even. The man turned. He looked at Marcus. His jaw tightened once, then smoothed over. "Right, of course." He turned back to the conversation. Across the room, Elena Voss had seen it. Marcus knew because he had been watching her the same way she watched the room, systematically, without making it visible. She stood 30 feet away, and she turned her head at exactly the moment the board member extended the glass. She looked at Marcus. A pause. 1 second, 2. A clear view of what was happening and a clear choice about what to do with it. Then she turned back to her group and continued her conversation. The string quartet began a new piece. Marcus moved toward the outer edge of the room. He didn't know about the video until Lila sent it to him at 9:47 that night. It had appeared in a private investor group, one of those encrypted messaging channels that existed in a gray zone between professional communication and something uglier. The clip was 31 seconds, slightly shaky phone footage from across the room near the East Bar. It caught the moment the board member extended the glass. It cut before Marcus's response. The caption read, "When diversity policies get ambitious." The comments ran 2 directions. Some were laughing, not openly, but in the coded language of people who found the implication funny and weren't willing to write it plainly. Emojis, abbreviations, the cover of irony. Others were uncomfortable, not angry, not willing to say it was fine, just quiet in the way people go quiet when they've witnessed something they can't categorize, and the cost of speaking feels higher than the cost of silence. Marcus read the thread. He did not respond, did not screenshot it, did not forward it to an attorney, did not start composing a statement. He closed the laptop. He sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Outside, the city continued its continuous, vast indifference. Then he opened the dashboard again and checked the positions he had been monitoring since 6 that afternoon. The numbers were moving exactly the way he expected. He cross-referenced 3 data feeds, flagged 2 entries for Lila to verify in the morning, and wrote a single line in the margin of his legal pad. "They don't know yet what they've shown me." He set the pad face down on the desk, picked up the watch, held it for a moment. Then he put it in his coat pocket and went home. The break between morning sessions came at 10:15, 20 minutes. Coffee, restrooms, corridor conversations. The in-between time where the real decisions often get made, where alliances get confirmed with a look or a hand on an arm, where the unofficial architecture of a deal gets laid before it ever touches the formal table. Marcus was standing near the window with Jordan Reyes discussing cash flow projections when his phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He didn't take it out immediately. He had learned over years of business that the person who checks their phone mid-sentence in a negotiation gives something away. He finished the sentence. He responded to Jordan's follow-up. He waited for a natural break. Then he looked. The email had come from Elena Voss's office address, time-stamped 7 minutes earlier, addressed to the full board distribution list and 3 institutional investors. Subject line: Compliance Protocol. Hale Investments Review Process. The body was brief. Effective immediately, due to certain outstanding compliance review requirements, all proposals and materials from Hale Investments would be routed for preliminary review by the Voss Enterprises junior analyst team before being elevated to the board. Careful language. Measured, procedural, wrapped in sanitized bureaucratic phrasing designed to sound administrative, while functioning as something else entirely. Nothing accusatory, nothing explicit, just a quiet structural reclassification dressed in the language of protocol. He read it twice. He had been publicly demoted, Not to his face, but in the inboxes of every decision-maker in the building, sent while he stood 20 feet away drinking coffee. His proposals, years of research, structuring, and strategic development, had been handed to junior analysts as though they required basic vetting before the adults were allowed to see them. He put the phone back in his pocket. Jordan had not looked up from his tablet, but he had stopped scrolling. 20 minutes later, Lila found Marcus in the corridor outside the conference floor. She had been in the building since 7:30, running point on documentation and monitoring press feeds. She looked like she had been operating a small crisis center for the past 2 hours, which she had. There's a second thing. She kept her voice low. A reporter from the financial desk at the Journal sent an inquiry at 9:52, requesting a comment regarding potential financial irregularities at the Hale Foundation. Marcus went very still. The Hale Foundation was not a large organization. It had never needed to be. It provided needs-based scholarships for first-generation college students from working-class immigrant families. It had been operating for 6 years. It was named for his father. What irregularities? They're citing an anonymous source claiming to have documentation of improper fund transfers. The reporter says they have 3 separate confirmations. She paused. They're attacking your legacy, Marcus. He looked at the wall. He knew it was a coordination because it was too precisely timed not to be. The email to the board, the reporter's inquiry, the gala video still circulating in private channels, not separate acts, movements in a sequence. Someone had designed a multi-track operation aimed at the same destination: the systematic dismantling of his credibility, his authority, and now his name. Not just his professional name, his father's name. His left hand had closed around the watch in his coat pocket. He felt the pressure of the case against his palm, the worn edge of the case back. The inscription he couldn't see, but could reproduce without thinking. Keep going. We made it this far. Lila was watching him with the look he recognized. Not pity, something more useful than pity. Readiness. Waiting for direction. Tell our attorney to preserve everything, Marcus said. Every piece of foundation documentation going back to founding. Audits, transfers, communications, everything. He paused. And tell him not to respond to the reporter yet. What do we tell the reporter? Nothing. Yet. He adjusted the watch in his pocket, then released it. When someone puts everything on the table that fast, it means they're out of time. He looked at the conference room door at the end of the corridor, its glass panel reflecting a long strip of late-morning sky. Good. That means they're scared. Lila looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the elevator with her tablet already open and her fingers moving. Marcus straightened his jacket. He went back into the meeting. He sat down, opened his portfolio, and did not look at Elena Voss. Did not look at the board member from the previous evening, seated 3 chairs down, who had not made eye contact with him once since walking into the room that morning. He settled into the chair with the contained, focused attention of a man who had a great deal to pay attention to. At the far end of the table, one of the institutional investors leaned toward his neighbor and said something Marcus couldn't hear. The neighbor glanced down the table, then away. The morning session resumed. Jordan Reyes had been CFO of Voss Enterprises for 4 years. In 4 years, he had signed off on 3 major acquisitions, 2 debt restructurings, a secondary public offering, and more quarterly earnings calls than he could remember with any pleasure. He had developed, over those years, the skill that separated good CFOs from great ones, which was not, primarily, an understanding of numbers. Numbers were easy. Numbers were just numbers. The real skill was knowing when numbers were telling a story someone in the room didn't want told. He had that feeling now. He had started the afternoon verification check as routine, a standard pass through the Q3 liquidity summary distributed to the board that morning. He was now doing something considerably different from routine. The Voss Enterprises balance sheet was, on its surface, reasonably solid. Revenue consistent, debt ratios within industry norms, acquisition pipeline showing appropriate return projections. But Jordan had been in finance long enough to know that a balance sheet told you what a company wanted you to see, not necessarily what was true. There was always a gap between those two things. His job was to measure it. He was measuring it now. What he found, buried in the liquidity structure of the past 6 months, was a pattern, not irregular on its face, not fraudulent in any simple sense, but structurally dependent. An organization whose apparent financial health was being maintained not by operational performance, but by external support, not fully visible in the reported figures. Voss Enterprises had a guarantor, not a formal lender with a disclosed rate and a filing. A guarantor, an entity that had, over the preceding 2 quarters, stepped in on 4 separate occasions to provide liquidity backstop when Voss's own reserves ran thin. Each intervention was documented internally, but disclosed only in the loosest terms in the public filings. Strategic liquidity support from affiliated entities. Language designed to mean almost anything. Designed specifically to. Jordan spent 40 minutes cross-referencing entity designations against publicly available corporate records from 2 jurisdictions. He found the shell. He traced 2 of the 4 registration layers before the trail went deliberately cold. He looked up from his tablet. At the front of the room, Elena was wrapping up a presentation on Q4 synergy projections. She moved through the slides with the practiced confidence of someone who had given this presentation many times and knew exactly where to pause for effect. At one point, discussing integration timeline, she said something clearly meant as reassurance. The structural position remains solid. We've always had support in the right places. We've never been without someone at the back. It was a small thing to say, offhand, the remark of someone who had relied on something so long they'd stopped thinking of it as remarkable. She meant the guarantor. She said it with the unconscious certainty of someone who had never seriously entertained the possibility that the support might not be permanent. The specific blind spot of someone who had spent years depending on a structure they didn't fully understand and had started to believe the structure was self-sustaining. Jordan looked at her. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus had been quiet through most of the afternoon. Not passive. His portfolio was open. His pen had moved twice. He had asked one precise question about the integration timeline that required Elena's team to consult a secondary document before answering. But he hadn't pushed. He had let the afternoon move in its rhythm while he watched. When Elena said the line about someone at the back, Marcus turned his head slightly and spoke in a voice low enough to be conversational and precise enough to carry exactly as far as he intended. Interesting. That you trust something you don't understand. Elena turned toward him, quick and controlled. Excuse me? I said, Marcus replied, same even register he had maintained all day. It's interesting. Trusting a structural position without fully verifying what sustains it, particularly at this scale. A beat. It's a reasonable approach. Another beat. Until it isn't. The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when 2 people are saying something and everyone else understands the exchange is about something other than what the words describe. Elena said, Our financial position has been reviewed by 3 independent... I know, Marcus said. I've read the reviews. Jordan looks back at his tablet. He stared at the entity structure on his screen. The shells, the registration layers, the 4 liquidity interventions, and their timing. He thought about the timing of the merger discussions and the timing of Marcus Hale sitting at this table at this particular moment. He ran one more search. The results came back in 40 seconds. Jordan's hands went flat on the surface of the tablet. He sat very still. He looked up at Marcus. Marcus was not looking at Jordan. He was looking calmly at the front of the room. But there was a quality to his stillness, the alertness of someone who knows exactly what is in their peripheral view while appearing to focus elsewhere. A chess player holding the whole board while appearing to study a single square. Jordan looked away first. He opened a new document and began writing quickly, with the focused urgency of someone getting something down before the thread slips. At the front of the room, Elena was continuing her presentation. She was smiling. The market opened at 9:30. Marcus was already in the conference room when the Bloomberg terminal on the far wall began updating. He had arrived at 8:56, set his portfolio on the table, poured a cup of coffee from the service tray by the window, and taken his seat. He had not checked his phone since 7:15. He had not needed to. Board members filtered in between 9:10 and 9:25. Elena arrived at 9:28. Composed, hair perfect, deep slate blazer, printed agenda placed at the head of the table with brisk authority. She intended to move through the morning efficiently. Then came the handkerchief, the guard, the laugh. Jordan's voice cutting through the quiet. Short interest just jumped, $600 million. And then it was 9:31. The Bloomberg terminal updated. Every phone in the room received the notification within roughly the same 30 seconds. A staggered sequence. One alert tone, then 3, then 6, then all of them, filling the room with a brief, overlapping chorus that sounded almost like a tuning orchestra in the moment before silence falls. The board members looked at their screens, then at the terminal, then back at their screens. The terminal was red. Voss liquidity halted, guarantor withdrawn. Below it, in the tighter data stream, 3 major creditor institutions had triggered review clauses in their lending agreements. 2 clearinghouses had paused automated processing on Voss-affiliated accounts. The stock was not yet halted, but it was moving in a direction that made halting look like the gentler outcome. A board member near the end of the table stood up, not to say anything, just stood, the way a body stands when the brain is overloaded and needs to do something physical with itself. 2 phones rang simultaneously and were answered simultaneously, both conversations beginning with the same word. What? Elena Voss stood at the head of the table and looked at the terminal. The structure of her composure was still there, chin level, hands steady on the table's edge. But behind it, something had gone out. Like a building with all its exterior intact and no power on inside. She looked at Jordan. Jordan looked at his tablet, then at Marcus, then back at Elena. He said nothing. 3 people walked through the door. Marcus knew them. David Sato, managing director of Radmore Capital. 61, measured, single-breasted charcoal. Claire Ellison of the Meridian Institutional Fund. 54, carrying the settled confidence of someone who had been underestimated so many times she had stopped registering it. And Thomas Okafor of Lighthouse Equity, who had been one of the first people in institutional finance to sit through an entire pitch from a 26-year-old Marcus Hale without checking his phone once. They did not look at Elena. They crossed the room and positioned themselves, with the natural ease of people who had rehearsed nothing but shared a complete understanding, to the left and slightly behind Marcus's chair. David Sato inclined his head. Brief, formal. Good morning, Chairman Hale. The room went silent. Not a phone shifted, not a chair moved. The Bloomberg terminal continued its quiet, relentless update in the background, numbers moving like a clock that had already marked the hour and was simply keeping record. Elena stared. Marcus stood. He looked at the board, at the institutional investors, at the live stream camera in the corner whose red light had been blinking since 8:47 and had captured every second of everything that had happened in this room today. He reached into his portfolio and placed a document on the table. It landed with the weight of a contract, not a proposal, not a letter of intent. An executed, dated, witnessed agreement. You thought I came here asking for a seat at your table. You let that sit. I've been sitting under it for years. His voice carried no theater, no triumph, no anger. The steady delivery of someone stating a fact they have lived with long enough that it no longer requires emphasis. Holding it up, Jordan spoke. The guarantor entity. He turned his tablet to face the room, screen showing the entity structure he had traced. The shells, the registration layers, the ownership trail that terminated at a holding company that terminated at a fund managed, at its beneficial core, by Hale Investments. Marcus Hale's firm has been providing liquidity backstop to Voss Enterprises for 8 months. Without that support, Voss would have defaulted on 2 separate credit facilities in the second quarter of this year. A board member said, "That's not," and stopped. "It is in the filings," Jordan said. "The language is opaque, but it is there. I verified it this morning." A pause. "I should have verified it sooner." Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She was looking at the contract in the table, at the 3 institutional investors standing behind Marcus, at the camera that had been recording since before the handkerchief hit the floor. The entire operating theory she had walked into this room with, about who held power here, about what this morning was going to be, had turned out to be something categorically different from what she believed. She was looking for a door on the other side of that understanding, and finding that all the exits had been built by someone else. Marcus looked at her once. He didn't speak to her. Not yet. There would be time for that. The live stream was still running. That fact had settled over the room like a second presence. The awareness that everything said and done in the past 90 minutes had been received in real time by 312 investors, observers, and analysts across 11 time zones. The morning had already made its record. A board member asked to cut the stream. No one seconded it. After a moment, the request simply dissolved. Elena stood at the head of the table. She had gathered herself the way people do in public when the alternative is visible collapse. Not fully, not convincingly, but enough to stay upright, to keep her voice at a functional register. The clarity of her position had settled in. Not the financial position, though that was the machinery of it. The moral position. The thing she had set in motion with a piece of silk and a comment about cleaning up, and a carefully composed email, and 3 additional security guards on the conference floor. She looked at Marcus. "I owe you." She stopped, started again. "On behalf of the board and Voss Enterprises, I want to acknowledge..." Another stop. In the silence were several things she was not going to name, all of them visible to everyone in the room and to the people watching on screens in offices she would never see. "I owe you an apology. For this morning. For the way you were treated here." She extended her right hand. Marcus looked at it. The room waited. He did not take it. "You didn't refuse my hand," he said. Level. Not hard, not soft. The tone of someone being precise rather than emotional. "You refused my humanity, and an apology in front of 300 witnesses doesn't undo what was decided before anyone was watching." A beat. "I don't need your hand, Elena. I needed your acknowledgement 12 hours ago." She lowered her arm. Her face compressed. Not a collapse, but a closing inward. The look of someone beginning to understand, possibly for the first time at this depth, the distance between what they intended and what they actually did. Jordan stood. He had been waiting with the contained patience of a man who had spent the last 24 hours recalibrating and had arrived at a position he was prepared to defend in public. "I want to address the board directly," he said. "And the stream." Everyone looked at him. Without Hale Investments' liquidity backstop, Voss Enterprises would have defaulted on 2 credit facilities in the second quarter of this year. The Hale team identified the vulnerability before any internal team flagged it, structured a guarantor mechanism to prevent a public default, and did so anonymously, without public credit, without leverage, and without using the position to extract favorable terms. He paused. "I want to be clear about what that means. The firm that was asked to remove its coat this morning, that was blocked at the VIP entrance last night, that had its proposals routed to junior analysts this morning as a compliance matter." He let that sit in the room. "That is the firm that kept this company solvent while we were doing all of that." Silence. Not the evasive silence from earlier, the kind that forms around something everyone has seen and no one will name. This was a different texture entirely. The silence of a room that had run out of ways to position itself and had arrived, without intending to, at the vicinity of truth. 3 board members who had laughed or smiled or said nothing that morning were now looking at the table with the careful attention of people who understood they were on the record. The board member who had extended the empty glass at the gala was looking at his hands. Then, one by one, 4 people around the table rose. Not for Elena. Not in response to any instruction. They rose the way people rise when words alone no longer feel sufficient. Quietly, without drama, one after another, in a room that 2 hours earlier had been arranged entirely in the other direction. The senior investor from Radmore Capital spoke. I'd like to move that the board formally acknowledge the full partnership agreement with Hale Investments, and that the merger terms be reviewed at the original submitted terms, not the revised routing. He looked down the table. Is there a second? There were 4. Elena's voice was quiet when she spoke, not the controlled quiet of earlier, but genuinely reduced. I'll recuse myself from the vote. No one objected. Marcus watched the proceedings without speaking. He sat with his hands flat in the table, his portfolio open, and the watch in his pocket. And he watched the room do what rooms eventually do when the accounting becomes impossible to avoid. The final tally was 11-1. The 1 was not Elena. She had kept her word. After the formal session concluded, and people were beginning to reorganize themselves around the new understanding of the morning, an older woman from one of the mid-tier institutional funds crossed the room toward Marcus. She had been in the back row for most of the session, and he didn't know her name yet. She stopped in front of him. Her expression had several things in it, recognition being one of them. I should have said something this morning, she said. When the guard... She didn't finish it. I didn't. Marcus looked at her. I know. A pause. I'm glad you stayed, she said. He nodded once. So am I. She moved on. Jordan found him near the window a few minutes later, the city stretched out below in the clear morning light of a day that had become something entirely different from what it started as. You could have moved earlier, Jordan said. Not an accusation, the observation of a man trying to understand the shape of something. The guarantor leverage. You had it months ago. Marcus thought about it for a moment. Using it months ago would have been about defending myself, he said. Waiting until now was about something else. Jordan waited. It was about making sure they had every opportunity, Marcus said, to be better than they were. He looked out at the skyline. They weren't. A pause. But they had the opportunity. That matters. Jordan was quiet for a while. What happens now? Marcus looked at the executed contract still sitting on the table, finalized months ago, held in reserve, now simply a document waiting to be filed. Now, he said, we do the work. 3 weeks later, Marcus went back to the basement. Not the lobby, not the executive floors. He took the service elevator, the one at the far end of the building near the loading dock that smelled like cleaning solution and recycled air, down to the sub-level. The doors opened onto a corridor with fluorescent lighting and painted cinder block and linoleum that had been waxed so many times the surface had gone slightly opaque. He knew this corridor. Not personally, he had never worked here, but he knew it from the stories. The hours his father kept, the routes he walked, the rooms he was responsible for. His father had described this building so many times in Marcus's childhood that Marcus carried a spatial map of it built entirely from words spoken in the kitchen of a queen's apartment, over rice and beans, over the sound of the crosstown bus outside. The janitor's room was at the end of the corridor. The door was partially open. Inside, a metal utility shelf with folded gray cloths stacked in a column, a deep sink with a dripping faucet, a mop with a wooden handle leaning in the corner, and a battered aluminum chair with a cushion someone had brought from home because the original had gone flat. A small shelf near the door held a thermos, a phone charger, and a photograph in a clip frame. A girl, maybe 12, in a school uniform, grinning directly at the camera with the confidence of someone who hadn't learned yet to be cautious about the world. The security guard from the morning of the summit was sitting in the aluminum chair. His name was Raymond, 61 years old. 19 years in building security, 4 years on the 42nd floor rotation. 4 grandchildren and 1 daughter. 17, junior year at a high school in the Bronx, who wanted to study environmental engineering at a school that cost more than Raymond's annual salary. Raymond looked up when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He knew who Marcus was now. The whole building knew, not just the executives, but the people in the service corridors and the loading dock and the night shift, where information moves differently, but moves. He had seen what happened on the 42nd floor, or heard about it, or both. He started to stand. "You don't have to," Marcus said. Raymond stood anyway, because standing was what he did when someone entered a room, and it was the only way he knew how to meet them. He held the brim of his cap and looked at Marcus with an expression navigating several things at once. "Sir, about that morning. I want to—" "Raymond." Marcus stepped into the room. "I know. I was following protocol, but He stopped. There wasn't actually an access question. "I knew that. He stopped again. "I know," Marcus said again. Then, quieter. "I've been in enough corridors like this one to understand." He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and took out an envelope. White, sealed, the name of a scholarship fund printed in the upper left corner. He held it out. Raymond took it. He looked at the name on the front. His daughter's full name, spelled correctly. He turned it over, opened it carefully, unfolded the single page inside. His face moved through several things in a few seconds. His mouth pressed together. His jaw worked once. He looked back up at Marcus with an expression that had no language attached to it. "Full scholarship," Marcus said. 4 years, engineering program. She'll need to apply. There's a form inside, but she's been pre-selected. The rest is hers. Raymond said, "I can't." "You can," Marcus said. "You let her." They stayed a few more minutes. They talked about the building, its history, the years Raymond had watched it be remade from the inside out, while the exterior stayed the same. Raymond mentioned at one point that he had known an older man who worked on the original maintenance crew when the tower was first constructed. A man from Queens, Caribbean family. Marcus said, "My father." Raymond went still. "Henry Hale?" "Yes." Raymond looked at Marcus for a long moment with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been redrawn along lines he hadn't anticipated. "He talked about you," he said finally. "Every shift, just about. Said you were going to—" He paused. "Going to walk back in through the front door one day." Marcus looked at the wall, at the worn track on the cinder block at shoulder height, years of mop handles and cleaning carts leaving their mark, a physical record of all the work that had happened in this room, invisible to every floor above it. "He was right," Marcus said. "Just took a while." The announcement came 2 days after that. Not a press conference. Marcus had never liked press conferences. A rented hall on the 3rd floor of a community center in Harlem, the same one where a college access nonprofit he had supported for 4 years ran its weekend programs. Folding chairs, overhead fluorescent lights, a small podium with a microphone that fed back slightly when you stood too close to it. 230 people attended. Students mostly. High school seniors, first-year college students, a few juniors already thinking about what came next. Teachers, a handful of nonprofit directors, a couple of journalists who had come out of genuine curiosity rather than social obligation. No board members, no institutional investors. Marcus stood at the podium and spoke for 11 minutes. He announced the Halcyon Scholars Fund, an endowment of $40 million structured to provide full 4-year college scholarships, plus professional mentorship and emergency support for students from first-generation immigrant families who demonstrated need and capability, and who were, in his words, the people who have historically been excluded from the rooms where decisions get made, not because they didn't belong there, but because the doors were designed to keep them out. He did not mention Voss Tower. He did not mention Elena. He did not mention the live stream, or the $2.4 billion, or any of it. The people in this hall didn't need that story. What they knew, from being in this room, in folding chairs, under fluorescent lights, with a microphone that fed back, was that this man had shown up. A girl in the 4th row raised her hand. 16, maybe 17. Yellow notebook open in her lap, pen moving the entire time Marcus had been speaking. "How did you stay calm?" she asked. "During all of it, when they were—" She made a small, frustrated gesture with her hand that contained everything she meant and didn't have words for yet. The room laughed. Warm, recognizing, the laugh of people who understood exactly what that gesture meant. Marcus looked at her for a moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the watch. He held it up. Not high, not for performance, just high enough to see. The scratched crystal caught the fluorescent light and scattered it. The worn leather band, the caseback with its invisible inscription resting against his palm. "Because I knew where I stood," he said. "Long before they did." He set the watch on the podium. He looked out at the room, at the yellow notebook in the 4th row, at the 230 faces arranged in folding chairs, at the people who had never been invited to any table he had ever sat at, and who were, for exactly that reason, the reason he had sat there. "The question isn't how you stay calm when someone decides you don't belong somewhere," he said. "The question is how you make sure you belong so completely, so thoroughly, so undeniably, that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant." He paused. "That takes longer. It's harder. But it's the one thing they can't take." The girl in the 4th row was still writing. Marcus didn't know what she was putting down. Maybe his words. Maybe something his words had made her think of. Maybe something that had nothing to do with him at all, and everything to do with where she was headed. He didn't need to know. He picked up the watch and put it back in his pocket. He stepped down from the podium. Someone handed him a cup of coffee. He took it. Outside, Harlem was doing what it always did.